one of the most impressive additions to Vought's pantheon of Supes in Boys Season 5 is ironically someone who's been a part of it for decades. He's just been missing for several years is all. Bombsight is one of the former flagship members of Vought's Supe initiative back when it was in its golden day, and that is made evident by the fact that he still hasn't aged a day. He still looks just as young as Soldier Boy does, and the reason behind that is V1. But how exactly did V1 make him who he is, and what does it mean for the overarching franchise? We'll answer all those questions and more in this video. So, without further ado, this is Bombsight's Anatomy Explained. So what exactly is Bombsight supposed to be? In The Boys Season 5, Bombsight is more myth than urban legend. At least in the beginning. No one has seen him or heard from him in decades. Of course, that changes as the series progresses, but the main idea behind his character is to portray just how secretive the nature of V1 is. And we say that because Bombsight is identified as one of 5 people who were given V1, the other 4 being Soldier Boy, Stormfront, Private Angel, and Torpedo. It's not a coincidence that all these characters will be appearing in the spin-off series Vought Rising, but we'll get into that in a few minutes, so stick with us until the end, because right now we need to focus on who Bombsight is and why his body acts as the template for V1 enhancements in this series. Before he became a Supe, Bombsight was a combat pilot for the US Armed Forces. That is most likely how he got recruited by Frederick Vought for his Compound V program, because we know that Vought was using military recruits to experiment on them. After getting his V1 injection, Bombsight became one of the most powerful men on Earth and was assigned to Soldier Boy's pre-payback team. He was an active Supe for quite some time, nearly 3 decades by our estimation, before he disappeared and left the world wondering where he went. We say that because Bombsight starred in the 1953 film Curse of Fu Manchu and was in a relationship with Golden Geisha, who was a late 70s, early 80s era Supe. But with V1 becoming the central pillar for the final season of The Boys, Bombsight returned in a bit of an old guard haunts the new kind of situation. So, now that we've established who he is and why he matters, let's get into the meat of this video, which is his actual anatomy. How does a V1 body actually work? When Bombsight lands in the underground parking lot where the boys have set up an exchange with him, we see that he's exactly like Soldier Boy. Not in the sense that he's Ben's clone, but in the sense that he hasn't aged a single day, despite having filmed commercials back when they were made in black and white. And that's only possible if you've taken V1. The first iteration of Compound V rewrites a human being's genetic code to essentially turn them into a god. In Season 5, we learned that the Supe virus that Shamir Shah was built keeping specific molecular receptors that the current iteration of Compound V possesses. The virus would bind to those receptors and destroy V users inside out. V1, however, has a completely different molecular structure when compared to what we call V2, and this structure has no open bonds or receptors for the virus to attach itself to. This is the basis for why V1 users are so much stronger than V2 users, because the original recipe was highly unstable, but also 10 times more potent than anything we've seen in the series before its introduction. Thousands of political prisoners at the Dachau concentration camp and scores of United States soldiers were sacrificed to ascertain this possibility, and the 5 names we mentioned in the previous section reveal the horrifying truths about a body that successfully endures a V1 injection. It makes life as we know it possible because life, by its very definition, must come to an end. The V1 overwrites the aging process and makes its user functionally immortal, allowing them to exist until time ends or their lives are snuffed out by other means. Cellular structure, tissue density, blood circulation, respiratory systems, immunology, all of it is improved to such a level that the person injected with V1 can no longer be called human in truth. It also makes users immensely powerful by enhancing their baseline physical stats to a level that can only be achieved by gods. When the boys break into Fort Harmony to recover the last available V1 file, they notice it's been locked behind a vault that only a dozen or so Supes would be powerful enough to break. Bombsight is one of the names at the top of that list. He's also extremely durable, with his physical structure being harder than rocks, and Butcher noting that Bombsight has a reputation for being unbreakable. Additionally, the V1 introduced a specific skill set to his anatomy by granting him the power of flight, but it isn't the same as Annie January's flight system. Bombsight is called Bombsight because he's named after a term used in weapons technology. The term is specifically used for an integrated targeting and deployment system that's most commonly found in fighter jets and combat planes, the very thing Bombsight used to operate before becoming a Supe. His flight pattern is based on precision, speed, and impact, and that That becomes evident from his short yet significant appearance in Season 5, Episode 6. When we see him landing in that underground car park to negotiate with the boys, notice how the reinforced concrete structures around him shatter like they were made out of plywood. That's how much force Bombsight's body generates whenever he takes off or lands. It's also the reason he's spoken of in hushed tones by all those who know it. Most Supes possess super hearing, but those who fly have a different kind of hearing system altogether. Bombsight's main job as an aerial expert must have required him to spend an exorbitant amount of time in highly pressurized environments. He would have crash landed without his internal equilibrium being calibrated to withstand those environments. His hearing and balance apparatus is on a completely different level from every other Supe, which makes sustained long-term high-speed flight possible for him. Couple that with his unbreakable physiology, and you're looking at a complete aerial weapon system packed in a human body. But this also brings us to a rather interesting point. Is Bombsight stronger than Soldier Boy, and what does that say about his design? The show explicitly tells us that Soldier Boy was the strongest Supe before Homelander was created, and the proof is in the pudding. He's made Homelander bleed from his nose with a single punch. Yeah, he might not possess unique abilities like flight, laser eyes, x-ray vision, or the ability to determine a person's emotional state by accurately analyzing their heart rate, but when it comes to pure physicality, Soldier Boy is technically the strongest Supe in the world, and that's what makes his fight with Bombsight so interesting, because for the first time, it looked like he'd not just met his match, that he'd been outmatched. Go back and watch Season 5, Episode 6 to figure out whether we're telling you the truth or not. And if you don't have the time to do that, let me do it for you. Soldier Boy was losing to Bombsight before he decided to use a metal pipe as a weapon. And the only reason he did that is because he knew Bombsight was literally unbreakable. This flying bomber's core V1 enhanced physical trait isn't his ability to fly, it's his immense durability. We've seen Soldier Boy punch through people, injure Homelander, leave Supes begging for mercy. But when he punched Bombsight repeatedly, he injured himself, which was made evident by the way he flexed his wrist. Bombsight's physical endurance makes him a lot like Emma Frost, except he might just be harder than a diamond. Ben struck him with that metal pipe multiple times and it didn't so much as scratch. He tried shoving it down Bombsight's throat because the Supe's insides are far more vulnerable than their external physiology, but Robbie resisted that as well. He was able to shrug off Butcher's cancer tentacles with ease that would have made Vicky and Cindy cry in unison. The fact that he didn't even have to maneuver Soldier Boy's arm into a vulnerable position to injure him alone is proof that he lives up to his unbreakable moniker, and there's a tactical reason for his durability beyond V1 enhancement. A few seconds ago, we compared Bombsight to a bomber, and that's not an inaccurate statement. When he was a Vought employee, his main role in combat missions must have been aerial recon and targeted precision strikes. Radars could pick up and shoot massive metallic structures like airplanes out of the sky with disgusting ease, but to do the same to an unbreakable missile in human form would have been next to impossible. Plus, Bombsight would have needed this durability to withstand the kind of air pressure that he was regularly subjecting himself to. And then there's the tiny matter of his localized ability being precisely what Soldier Boy hates: flying. Ben might be the most physically imposing Supe in Vought history, but Bombsight's anatomy seems to have been created to confound him in particular. That scene where Soldier Boy needs to hang on to him to get the V1 from him and then complains about having to fly tells us one thing about Bombsight. He might not be the strongest Supe in history, but he is designed to counter Soldier Boy by exploiting his weaknesses. And that could be one of the reasons they've hated each other for 80 years. Ben knows he's the man, but Robbie's the closest thing to him, and he can't have that. Sure, Soldier Boy's nuclear upgrade from Russia gives him the definitive edge, because now he can just fry the V out of anyone's system. But before that happened, Bombsight must have been seen as his equal, and it must have pissed him off something proper. So now the question becomes, if he's as useful of an asset as we're making him out to be, why in the world did we not see him up until the third to last episode of the main timeline? Why would Vought build a Supe like this and then lose him for decades? From a corporate standpoint, Vought choosing not to chase down a profitable asset like Bombsight makes no sense. You could have kept printing money off his brand for centuries and no one would have realized what was really going on. Heck, Bombsight alone could have sold the angle that all Supes are created by God with his functional immortality, and he would have been the ideal poster boy for their talent management wing before Compound V's existence was leaked to the public. So why did they let him disappear? Well, the answer is in the answer we just gave you. The distinction between being bestowed with godly powers and being godly would have become so thin that people would have caught on eventually. And then there's the fact that Soldier Boy himself was coming under fire for his advanced age well before he was sold out to the Soviets. When you're as flashy and public as a Supe, people don't just forget who you are or what your age is. They keep tabs through the tabloids, the films you're making, and they remember. While Payback betraying Ben went deeper than just covering up his age, for Vought, that alone was a one-sum game. They couldn't keep capitalizing on an IP that didn't decay because human life does decay. The cold corporate truth truth is that all Supes have a shelf life, and Bombsight's ended a long time ago. What also helped was the fact that he was a drug addict, and he made the decision to isolate himself through his own volition. When Butcher and the boys enter Fort Harmony to find the broken V1 vault, they don't zero in on who could have done it until Butcher finds heroin on the floor. That's the moment Bombsight's involvement becomes concretized, and the revelation that Mr. Marathon was his drug dealer only reinforces that point. All Supes are liabilities when it comes to drugs, but with Bombsight, it went beyond drugs. He isolated himself not because he was spiraling out of control, but because the love of his life told him she didn't want to be with him forever. And that's where V1 comes back into the picture. Why steal V1 now, and what does that reveal about his limits? Season 5, Episode 6 revealed that Bombsight was truly and madly in love with Golden Geisha. He was so in love with her that he wanted her to be with him forever. He stole the last remaining V1 injection to give to her to live the rest of his immortal days with her by his side. But Geisha refused immortality, and Bombsight became depressed. He started zipping around all over the world, most likely hanging out in high-altitude locations where the temperatures were low, considering he showed up in a fur-lined bomber jacket in Episode 6. But the fact of the matter is that he stole that injection not for himself, but for Golden, and he brought it because he thought that she was dying. Yet this gives up an interesting question, which is, what if Bombsight used the V1 on himself? What would have happened to him, and why would he have used it in the first place? The truth is, he doesn't need to use V1 again after the first dose because his body's been altered permanently. Just look at Soldier Boy. When he was experimented on by the Russians, he didn't lose any of his natural strength or ability. This suggests that all V1 test subjects will never age and never see their power being diminished over time, which makes an increase in power and potency the only plausible reason for injecting oneself with the shot again. Bombsight's physical stats would have been multiplied 100 times over by a second V1 injection compared to his baseline human physiology, but that's only if it didn't destabilize the already chemically unstable foundation of his first injection. We know that he doesn't take the V1 for himself, but if he did, it wouldn't be because he had limitations. It would be because he basically wanted to go beyond what he'd already had, and what he already had was essentially limitless, right up until the moment Soldier Boy gifted him mortality and had a chance to be with Golden Geisha by frying the V out of his system. How does Bombsight bridge the boys and Vought Rising? The final question that we need to answer is how Bombsight bridges the gap between the boys and Vought Rising, because that's why he was included in this season, and why Sage specifically named the spin-off show's cast as the only survivors of V1. The answer can be found in the exchange he has with Soldier, not about Goldie, but about Clara, aka Stormfront, aka Liberty. Turns out the main reason behind his feud with Ben is Clara herself, because all three of them, Soldier Boy, Bombsight, and Stormfront, were working towards Frederick Vought's idea of becoming the ultimate expression of white supremacy. This isn't spelled out in the show just as clearly as we're doing right now, but that's what it is. The fact that Bombsight was jealous Clara chose Ben over him, and that he mentioned their quote-unquote true purpose, that even he used the phrase ultimate expression of what they could be, is evidence that these men were aware of Vought's true mission on some level, and that mission will form the heart of Vought Rising and establish the core conflict between Ben and Robbie in that series. In The Boys, we just hear their old rivals and get a taste of that rivalry before a reconciliation that would genuinely make grown men cry. But in Vought Rising, we'll see that rivalry in full effect, and that's only possible because of Bombsight appearing in Season 5. But as for today, we're glad you stuck with us until the very end, because this is all we've got for you on Bombsight's Anatomy. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content from The Boys one more time. We'll see you guys soon with yet another video, so until then, stay safe, have a great day, and as always, stay marvelous.